Hello, everybody. Welcome to week one. Long time no talk. Hopefully you have watched the video in the orientation module, so you know the lay of the land in terms of how the class works with all the different assignments. And so this is one of your assignments, which is that I will start each week off with a welcome video, and then there will be questions related to materials or what I've said in the video scattered throughout using something called PlayPosit. So I used to post these things randomly, and then I started putting little extra credit assignments, and then it was important things that I was setting up. So then I realized I needed to figure out other ways to do it. Now I've got this new technology, which is pretty cool. So like I said, randomly, there will be questions that will pop up here. They may relate to something you see on the bookshelf behind me. They may relate to materials we've already learned to help reinforce yet again another time. So because we're starting off the week, we're starting off with a clean slate. You haven't really gone through anything yet. So I'll just come up with some interesting random questions that you will you'll answer, and they'll pop up. So there'll probably be one like right here. All right, so hopefully you saw how that works. Something popped up. Maybe it's a multiple choice question, and you pick the answer, and we go from there. And that's how it goes. So I want to set up the week for you. You're in the 8-week class, so that means that this is a full semester squeezed into 8 weeks. So it goes quickly. I do adjust the assignments a little bit. You don't have quite as many because it's 8 instead of 16 weeks, but they're weighted heavier. So it's really important that you're doing the work, that you're thinking about what you're learning. So here's how everything goes. We start off the week with one of these videos. Then you're to read the textbook, listen to the music, and go through the online materials. And then you will be prepared to answer the discussion questions, answer the reflection observation, take the quizzes, be able to work through all the materials. So that's the idea. Now, this is an asynchronous class, so I don't control how you use the time other than these are always due by noon on Thursday. And that is the idea, is that then you've gotten through enough to help you to be able to do the discussion. Your initial prompt is always due by the end of the day on Thursday. And then everything else is due typically Sundays by 11:59 p.m. So don't wait till the last minute. Manage your time well. Don't put your faith in technology. I've had students where, power went out and things crashed and computers died and all that stuff. I know some of you do this all on your phone. That's tricky too. And I'll just give you the advice to please proofread before you turn things in. Lots and lots of errors come through the phone. So anyways, that's how that works. So let me just set up the week for you. You're going to start off with an orientation module. So you're going to go through materials that are going to explain how the class goes, what it's like to do online learning. You're going to learn about something known as neural nostalgia. And I know that a lot of you have, because of the pandemic, have had to deal with Zoom classes and all of that, but a lot of people got thrown into online. I've actually been teaching online since before the pandemic. So I was trained in this. I knew how to do it. When we all had to pivot, I was all set and ready to go. Many weren't. So in the orientation materials, you're going to learn some things that may be new to you, and then you may even look at them and go, wow, why did we not do that all along? And so, it goes that way. We all got thrown into a panic and everything worked from there. So you're going to learn about that. You're going to learn about neural nostalgia, which has to do with why your favorite music is your favorite music, how that comes about. And that really plays a big role in this class because we always have our favorites. We always think that the music that we listen to within a certain time frame is always the best music ever. And it doesn't necessarily mean the music that was created during that time as much as it means the music that you were listening to during these particular ages. And you'll learn about that in the assignment. And then you're going to get into the foundation. So this is the history, rock history, appreciation. And so we've got to go back in time a little bit. Now, we could go back to the beginning of time and talk about music and folk music and art music. And, there's basically 4 kinds of music. There is cultural ritual music, and that it takes place in all cultures and is always connected to some other, typically some other activity: birth, death, marriage, war. There's some connection to it. Then there is folk music, and folk music is can also cross over with cultural ritual music, but it also could be music for social functions. So it could be music for dancing and social dancing versus, ceremonial dancing or things like that. So you that would play in folk music as well. And folk music and cultural ritual music are done pretty much by everybody. And you don't necessarily have to be trained, at least not necessarily in a formal way, although there may be systems of training in other ways. You're dealing with a lot of music where it's transmitted orally, meaning aurally, by ear. Then there is art music. You may not think of or know that term, but we think of the term classical music. Art music is typically created by individual composers. It is often, although not always, written down, but it may be organized in a very sophisticated way. Not all cultures have art music, so that's an important thing to understand. And it's typically created for the edification of the listener. It's for some higher purpose than you would have, say, with folk music. And then we have popular music. And popular music, or pop, pop means that it's consumed by large numbers of people. And popular music is often created for financial gain, although not always the case. And there are certain bands in certain times and certain eras where you will have folks that cross over in terms of why they're making music and how they're making music. But in popular music, you generally have people that are trying to make a livelihood out of what they're doing. In art music, the composers would want to have a livelihood, but it wasn't necessarily done by selling their music, as it may be by commissions, or it may be by royal appointments or things like that, where, or nowadays it'd be grants and such. But popular music, the idea is you're going to sell the music. And so that's really the focus of what we're doing. So I've had students say, we don't really spend a lot of time talking about rock music. Rock music, or rock and roll to be specific, only really existed for about 5 years in the late 1950s, mid 1950s. So 1954 to 59, thereabouts. And you're going to learn down the line why that is and why we say what it is. And I'll stop referring to rock and roll after we talk about folks like Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley, who's the first big game changer, or one of them. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, folks like that. And then I'll refer to it more as rock music. So it's important to understand that, and it's some things that I say often throughout this class. One, nothing exists in a vacuum. So there is no style of music out there that doesn't come from somewhere and then in some ways lead to somewhere. And that's the same for pretty much all arts in general. And the other one that I often say is that death is good for a career, which, sadly, you'll have these artists that maybe are underappreciated or unappreciated, or they've fallen out of favor, and then they die. And then, then they get, you hear all about them for a little while, and then they're gone, and we don't hear about them anymore. But maybe they sell more albums, their record sales go up, or their streams go up, or their t-shirt sales go up, or whatever. And so so that kind of sets that all up, but we've got to go back in time. So what I want you to understand as we go through this class, that when we're talking about rock and roll and rock music that comes from R&B, which comes from blues, we're talking about the blending of cultures to create this kind of music in the first place. The blending of cultures happens all the time. It's gone on forever, and it continues to go on. We live in an interesting time right now where a lot of that is being re-examined and some of it's being rewritten, but that is the case of it. And so what happens is that you have European harmonies and melodies and the sense of that, the concept of that, combined with African rhythms that came over by way of the slave trade. And so, of course, when we deal with, American music, we have to deal with the racial components of that. We have to absolutely deal with slavery, We have to deal with the plantations. That's where the blues comes out of. That's part of the history. And it's terrible that it's part of the history. It'd be great if it wasn't part of the history, but it is. And sadly, the history of slavery goes back to the beginning of man. And so we, this is why we learn history, by the way. I don't know about you. When I was younger, I was not a big fan of history classes. As I got older, I realized how important it is. And you may have heard the term that those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And we're looking at that again right now. We're dealing with things right now in our country that other cultures have dealt with previously. If you want interesting parallels, go back and read Dostoevsky, in the mid 1800s and what was going on over in Russia, and some of these things you'll be like, wow, like that's happening here right now. So it's important to understand the context, and that doesn't make it any easier. It's tough. We are flawed people who do flawed things, and we sometimes do awful things. And this is not unique to the United States. In fact, if you go back to the beginnings of the slave trade, or at least the slave trade as we know it, there's been slave trades in the Middle East. There's been slave trades all over the world. This is nothing new, and it's nothing unique to our culture. But if you go back to the beginning of the slave trade that we think of, that pertains to this class, the United States didn't even exist when it started. There was no United States. So we were British colonies, and the whole start of that slave trade was coming out of a slave trade that existed through a lot of the Western European countries, and particularly England, who had set up a very interesting financial network that involved, drugs and weapons and slaves and manufacturing. And so you had slaves, you had plantation owners that were growing cotton. The slaves were picking the cotton. The cotton was then being shipped over to England. It was being made into clothing, and then it was coming back here to be sold. And it was interesting, but all of that started happening before there was ever a United States. So it's important that we understand history, because it's very easy to go, oh yeah, the United States is bad because they started slavery. One, nope, been going on for thousands of years. Two, the country wasn't the United States when all of this started. But it is an ugly part of humankind. Humankind is always about exploiting power. And there are always people in every culture, in every country, everywhere that will exploit power. And so we inherited a piece of that, at least culturally, historically, and that influences the music that we are making. Not you and me making, but in terms of, American popular music. So you're going to learn about folk music. You're going to learn about Stephen Foster. You're going to learn about minstrel songs, which is another ugly part of a more racist time in some ways. I mean, racism has always been with us, and I think that's an important thing to understand too. But I think that there's certainly a heightened awareness to it, but I don't think it's anything we're ever going to, get the corner on, because, people are people, right? Just like Depeche Mode says. And so you're going to learn about minstrel songs, and then you're going to learn about the music on slave music. You're going to learn about work songs and field hollers. You're going to learn about the blues, which is an early folk music, uniquely American folk music, where again, you have the combination of African rhythms, African instruments. You may not know this, but the banjo is actually an African instrument in origin. And their the sense of rhythm, particularly coming from West Africa, combining with European harmonies and melodies that they were hearing over here. Many of them went to church. Many were forced to go to church. Eventually it became, I think a big saving grace for a lot of them in a way. It was a way to get through a really lousy situation. But it's a gray history. You know that, I know that, right? If you don't know that, take the time to know that. So you're going to learn about the blues, you're going to learn about country blues and Delta blues and classic blues. And then into chapter 2, you're going to learn about urban blues. You're going to learn about the role of chess records. You're going to learn about independent, what we would call indie labels, right? Goes back to this time. And a couple other things just to get out there, because I'm going to let you do the learning. You're going to learn about again, urban blues, and you're going to learn about rhythm and blues, which is the combining of dance rhythms. Oh, I forgot to mention, you're going to learn about ragtime, which has classical influences and African influences as well. So you're going to get all this in. The point of these videos isn't for me to teach you all the material; it's to set it up and to contextualize it so that you're ready to go. So a couple things though that I want you to understand. Is that back, in the late 1800s is really when radio came out. And when radio first came out, there was really only AM radio. So until we get to covering the mid to late 60s, anytime you're reading about radio, you're going to be dealing with AM radio. And AM radio, it was, didn't necessarily always have the great sound quality, but it could transmit over pretty far distances. When they would transmit it during the day, it would transmit terrestrially, meaning it would go from like antenna to repeater to antenna, etc. And you could get some pretty powerful radio stations, even illegally. Later, they ended up having illegal radio stations that were like across the border, these 50,000 watt stations. But then in the evenings, AM radio would transmit through the atmosphere, and it would kind of actually go up. They could do that then at night, and radio could actually reach, in some cases, states away. And so there was a very different way of how music was transmitted. So the importance of radio, when we talk about recordings in the 1800s, the recordings were basically wax cylinders and then wax discs and then shellac discs with 78s. And then from there we get to 45s. And I think in the next week, I'll do a little show and tell with that. So whenever someone's, when they talk about going into a studio and recording, they're always recording 45s. They're recording songs. They're not really dealing with albums. That doesn't become a big deal until a little bit later as well. So this stuff will be covered in the online materials. It will be covered in the book. And so I want to reiterate something that I said in the video, which is that the book is really the anchor to this class. And between the book and the online materials, you have all the information you need to do a good job on the assignments, on the discussions, on the reflection observations, on the quizzes. Everything that you need is there. So take the time. Don't plagiarize. You don't want to go there. You don't need to go there. Put things into your own words. Enough material is there that you could ace every assignment just based on what you have. I know that a lot of folks think, hey, I just want to get through this. I don't really care about the learning. Care about the learning. It is what matters. Okay? It really is. You're going to go down in life and you're going to be, because I did, right? In certain classes, you kind of blow off. And then I look back and I'm like, why did I not pay more attention back then? And find myself sometimes relearning that. So that is it for now. Because this is an 8-week class, these videos do get a little long. I try to keep them in the 15 to 20 minute range at the most. I try to pare them down sometimes, but we're covering more material in the 8-week class, so it needs to go on a little bit longer. And of course, we're just getting started here. So by now, or by the end of this, you will have your questions that have popped up and you'll be able to answer them. And these are assignments. This is part of your grade. So make sure that you do them. If you have questions, please reach out to me on Canvas. That's better than emailing me. I'd rather have it in Canvas, keeps everything all together. And I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. So that's it. Have a great week. Reach out if you need to. Enjoy the crazy up and down October weather. The little bit of a heat wave we just had was nuts. And I'm definitely ready for a proper Southern California fall, which I guess this kind of is. So that's it. We'll talk soon. Bye.